So now we're going to be looking at Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 7. And this is the most extended passage in the New Testament discussing politics, and particularly what God created politics to be and how we're supposed to respond to it. And sometimes people are a little puzzled by this passage in that, in chapter 12, you have all of this stuff about what the life of love is supposed to look like for the Christian believer. And then right after this, Paul's going to go right back to that topic of love. And in the middle is this little discourse on politics. Well, why is that? I think part of the reason is Paul must have known that either because of things they were already experiencing or things they were about to experience, when he talks about loving your enemies and blessing those who persecute you and the kind of love that's hard to do, that is exactly what was going to be asked of the Roman Christians. There's probably already some of the Jewish believers who had been expelled from Rome by the Romans and have now come back. And there's about to be a persecution of the church that's going to break out under the Emperor Nero, right? So there's a lot of reasons why God might have prompted Paul to include this discussion. And it's interesting to kind of see how it goes. And I think one of the things it does is it forces us to raise a deeper question that goes beyond just politics. And that is, how do you react to the phrase, submit to authority? I think in our culture, there's a deep resistance to really respecting authorities, just in general. And politics is one of the areas where that tends to manifest itself. And so one of the things you can ask people in your group is, what are the authorities that you have trouble submitting to? And you can ask specifically about politics. Do you find it hard to be submissive to the law? Are there laws that you are often tempted to break? Or are there, governors or presidents or people that you find it difficult to treat with honor and respect? Well, one of the things we learn as we start looking at the passage is that governments are something God instituted. God created them, and God calls us to submit to them. And we even get a picture of what governments are for. They're supposed to help restrain evil doing by punishing it, as well as commending and promoting those things that are good. Because of our fallen nature, this is something we desperately need. I think one of the things that is a real issue right now in our culture among evangelical Christians is a tendency to be very ungrateful for the government that we have because of various policies people may disagree with. If you look at countries where the rule of law is just completely broken down, where there is no effective government, places like Somalia, Syria is getting very close to being in that position. It is a terrible, terrible situation. Even bad governments are generally a blessing compared to no government at all. And to live in a country where we have the quality of water and roads and schools and all of those different kinds of things that we have compared to most places in the world is a blessing. The fact that we don't have police officers asking us for bribes constantly, that the fire department is so good at what they do. I mean, there's really a lot of things that we take for granted that are blessings. And so one of the things is for us to see that God realized human beings needed order. They needed some forms of authority to try to keep us in line. That's actually something we should be grateful for rather than resentful for. Now, one of the questions that sometimes comes up is, so what should submission to authority look like in cases where it seems like the government is doing things contrary to what the Bible teaches, right? And here I think one of the things we need to say is, there's a difference between a case where we simply think the government's made a mistake, say about how big the budget should be, or what the highest tax rate should be. I mean, we're not going to find there was like 36 or 39% or whatever in our Bible to tell us those kinds of questions. There may be issues of wisdom that are important there, right? But we can, I think, have a policy of submission, because otherwise what we're really saying is, well, I'll submit to the authority as long as I think the authority is right, which is really another way of saying that you're not actually submitting to anyone at all. Now, with respect to things that are actually sinful, right, we can't ever give the government or the nation or any of those things our undivided loyalty. We already learned from Romans chapter 12 that we have presented our whole bodies as living sacrifices to God. Our highest loyalty is to Him. There's no way we can ever promise unconditional loyalty to anything else. And so that means if a governing authority commands us to do something contrary to what the scriptures have taught us, we have to say no. And if that means, we have to submit to punishment and be thrown in jail, then we may have to live with that as a consequence. But we have an authority over us that's the ultimate authority, God. And our submission to governments is a subordinate authority, right? We honor them because it's a way of honoring God. And if they order us to do something directly contrary to God's will, then the higher authority has to trump. Now, it's also worth noting that there is an important difference between the Christians in Paul's day in Rome and us now. The Roman Empire was not a democracy. They had no say in what the laws were. Because we live in a democracy, we actually have kind of a dual role. We actually get to influence how authorities will use their power, as well as being under the authorities after the decisions have been made. And so it's a right thing for us as Christians to ask, how can we, as a way of loving our neighbor, try to engage in politics to try to help it do what governments were created to do, to punish what is evil, to maintain peace and order and justice. But we also have to do that still with an attitude of respect and submission, not where we only submit because we're afraid of punishments, but out of conscience because we know that God is the one who is the ultimate authority, and that is what he has called us to.